You folks have been making this cheese for some 30 years. You distributed it in over 100 retail locations, if I'm not mistaken. And then you, in addition to that, had sold some to a location or had a distributor in California. They had some cheese that was tainted. They traced it back and said that it was your cheese that was tainted. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Well, they said it was tainted. There's no guarantee it was ever tainted because in California, they waited 55 days before they contacted the state of Missouri and said there may be a possibility of Listeria and Staph aureus in the cheese. Then the state of Missouri comes in and puts an embargo order on the door. From there, it's all downhill.
Right. So they basically put a padlock, if you will, figuratively or literally.
Figuratively.
Okay, on your operation, and they brought the USDA in, who then did
Actually, the FDA.
The FDA, I'm sorry, who came in and did some 99 swabs to identify whether or not you had Listeria in your facility. Am I correct? So these swabs are like a gigantic Q-tip, and they basically go in and swab down the countertops where you make it, and they swab the drains out, and they swab under the corners to try to find maybe some hidden bacteria. Is that a fair?
Yes, that's a fair assessment.
Okay. They did 99 of these swabs, and out of the 99 came back negative for their cultures.
Correct.
So at that point, the FDA kind of said, okay, we're hands off. There's nothing for us to do here. And we're gonna take a backseat role. Is that correct?
Actually, they let us know that they were finished with their
investigation,
but that they might be back.
Okay.
Well, they let us know they were finished with their investigation, but they said they didn't send us a letter. They didn't send us a letter. They didn't send us a letter until about 2 years later, year and a half later.
Yes.
Stating that we were no
letter.
longer. That they would cleared us, but yet they could always come back if they needed to.
Sure, and I can understand that they do that as a standard practice, where they want to basically have the opportunity to at any time step back in and reopen the investigation.
If they need to, yes.
If they feel like they need to, right? So okay, so the FDA is off the case. They say basically we're clearing you from our investigation. We have the right to come back in at a later date if we feel it's necessary.
Well,
then
they still had the option. They had still come in, and they were the ones pushing for a recall. They told us we needed to do a recall. We had to do a recall, but on record they couldn't say we had to do a recall.
They said if we didn't do the recall, they would do it for us. So
they intimidated you into doing the recall.
Yes.
Which is standard, by the way, for federal agencies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, intimidation is the way in which they operate. You either do it our way, or we're going to force you to do it.
Well, they said they didn't have the regulatory power at that point in time to force to do it, but then they turned around and said you will do it, and then they, either the State Milk Board or the FDA one, leaked we were going to do a recall to force us to do a recall. And when we pointed out that when we wrote a email out to everybody stating that we were forced to do a recall, we were pushed into doing a recall by the FDA, said we don't have the right to do that.
Yeah, they said it was voluntary.
So they backed off.
Right.
But yet they still pushed us into a recall no matter what we wanted to do ourselves.
Sure. So the cheese was recalled from all of the distributors that you had, however much was out there. You got 100 distributors, so they brought it all back. You then brought it in and put it in this lockdown facility.
Actually, no. That most of it wasn't brought back. Most of it was consumed. We had many customers that said, we're not returning our cheese. We love our cheese.
Okay.
We know what's going on here. We know the agenda of what they're trying to do.
I see.
We will keep our cheese. We want to keep our cheese.
So out of all the people, post-recall, anyone who did not return the cheese, were there any reports of anyone becoming ill?
Never.
So
not in 30 years.
In 30 years, you've never had one person report that they got ill from eating your product?
No.
Interesting. All right, we are back on America's Voice Now, and we have with us this morning in studio Joe and Denise Dixon from Morningland Dairy. They have, this is the couple that basically had their farm shut down. They had 36,420 pounds of cheese, raw milk cheese, confiscated yesterday and destroyed by the State Milk Board because they, quite frankly, were prosecuted and persecuted by the Missouri State Milk Board and the FDA, and they have been through the mill. This has basically bankrupted them on a personal level. They've lost their farm, they've lost their home, they have lost all of their herd. They've been put out of business. They lost some 6 or 7 employees, not to mention their own work and labor. They have 12 children, all of them their own. They have basically at this point been brought down to the stage where they had to give up their home, and they are living in what used to be their manufacturing facility, because that's the only thing left on the property that they own, which is mortgaged to an extent that's so far above its value that it basically, even the bank doesn't want it back. And they have really been through the gamut on this. We wanted to give you folks an opportunity to hear live from them exactly what's transpiring in their lives and how all of this has affected them. And so we've asked them to come into the studio this morning and talk with us and kind of explain their story. So Denise, before we took the break, you guys told me a story about this FDA inspector who actually wanted to buy a 10-pound block of cheese. If you wouldn't mind kind of telling that story, because I think it's kind of telling.
Well, from the beginning, they intimidated us with their camouflage uniform when they first came in, and then they, of course, did their swabs for several days, and afterward, the next day, Ms. Ashmore came in, the leader of the FDA group, and said they were going to take a 10-pound block of cheese.
Actually, they said they were going to purchase a 10-pound block.
Yes, they were going to purchase from us a 10-pound block of cheese that they would be testing. And I said, I can't sell you a 10-pound block of cheese because I have an embargo sticker on my door. And she said, oh, that's okay. We talked with them, and it's okay. And I smelled a rat. I thought, if I sell you this block of cheese, you're going to put handcuffs on me because I violated the embargo.
Right. And actually, if they really wanted it for testing, they could have just taken it and said, we need this for sampling.
I believe they do have to purchase it. I don't believe they're allowed to take by the rules. I believe that's correct.
But anyway, I told her, I'm sorry, I can't sell it to you. And she said, like I said, that we have permission. I said, get that in writing for me. Okay, we'll do that. And I said, but I need to tell you that I can't sell you just any piece of cheese in there because it's not all for sale at this time. And she said, oh, yes, it is. Anything you put in the cooler is for sale. I said, I'm sorry, it's not. According to state regulation, it's 60 days before I can sell any cheese.
It has to age 60 days, essentially, from the day that you create it, just to, right.
Mm-hmm. And I said, also, before we sell any cheese, we do sensory testing. We look at the cheese, we smell the cheese, we taste the cheese, and we decide whether the cheese is a sellable cheese. And I said, that is all we have for sale. She said, she objected to that heartily, and then she threatened me. She said that she would, she could have another federal agency brought in, I can't remember which one it was, to...
Another federal police...
Federal marshals?
Yes,
something
a marshal type.
Federal marshals.
I believe it was.
Gee whiz, over milk, right?
Standing there with my my knees knocking and my hands sweaty, and
sure.
I said, well, you have to do what you have to do, but I have to do what I need to do also. And then she went to a superior. She called some superior to speak with them first, because I told her, whatever it is you have to do, I cannot sell you just any cheese in my cooler. She then came back a short while later and said, we won't be purchasing any cheese today.
Interesting. So basically they used a standard tactic of intimidation with the threat of some, punitive damage to come if you refuse to sell them the cheese, which was in direct violation of, at that point, a court order. It just goes to show you, and of course I could appreciate why you would feel like that was an entrapment step, right? Because if you sell them the cheese, then they could say in court documents, oh, and they sold us cheese in violation of the court order, and you'd be, you wouldn't even have an opportunity. And I know how lawyers work; they're not very good mouthpieces, and I'll bet money that a lawyer would not have come out and said yes, but they forced them to buy that, to sell that cheese. So I understand exactly where that comes from, and I have to tell you that's not unusual, that federal agencies will utilize a lot of intimidation. In fact, state agencies will too, because their goal is basically to rule by intimidation. They threaten you with their power, with their ability to punish you financially and or economically and or criminally.
And anytime I would question them as to what they were doing, would say, well, you don't really need that you have this somewhere else, or I don't think that that's something that's I can't remember exactly, but anytime like for instance, when I questioned her about buying the cheese, she's there with her pad of paper writing down,
right.
As if
every word you say,
every word I'm saying, like
that we're being
it
non-compliant.
can be used against me.
Right. So you're not cooperative.
Not cooperative at all.
Amazing. You guys have really been through the mill here. Do you have an address where people who are interested could send you some funds to help to? I mean, there's no way that anyone can actually really remunerate you for what's gone on, but I know your plight financially is dire. Is there any place do you have an address where people could mail you some funds if they wanted to?
Our home address is 6248 County Road 2980, Mountain View, Missouri 65548.
Could you run that again?
6248 County Road 2980, Mountain View, Missouri 65548.
Okay. I'm going to read that a couple of times during the rest of our discussion this morning.